Hi. Welcome to another video of my YouTube channel, which of course is called Atheist, a Bird with No Cage. I think that's more or less explanatory of the basic ideas that I'd like to discuss. My name is Ed, and as always, I'd like to remind you that I'm 78 years old, and I don't know what the hell that is, if I'm bragging or complaining or making excuses or whatever, but that's a fact. Please excuse the sunglasses. We are doing this video outside, of course, in front of the house, with the pool and the house to my back, and it's bright and it's hot, so ergo the sunglasses. What I would like to speak about today is something that I think is very important. I have Christian friends, a couple of pastors included, and they like to, of course, talk about their religion and what they believe, and so do I. And one of the things we get into, it seems to be a trend in the Christian narrative, is the idea that biblically the Old Testament is the Old Testament, and it was kind of written for the culture of those times and that. So they seem to be saying the Old Testament is less important to their beliefs than the New Testament. Their claim is that the New Testament is a book with about Jesus, and it appears on my reading of the New Testament that the old Yahweh and this Father figure, God, has more or less disappeared. What I want to discuss, though, is this idea that evangelicals, Christians especially, say that the old discussions about the Old Testament are no longer viable because they're not interested in so much about discussing that. What they're interested in is claiming that Jesus is their ideal, and they use terminology like, I give my life to Jesus, Jesus comes into my life, and all of that. And I think that generally that idea of giving your life to another person, even this person you think is ideal, that is not a good idea. And I don't think it's a good idea to teach that to children or young people. More importantly, I think that this Jesus, this as a character in this story in the New Testament, I claim that Jesus is I use the term, he's a jerk. It's simple as that. And I'm going to try to point out why I think that is so. Okay, we're reading, just getting into Matthew alone in the New Testament. We'll quickly run into stories about Jesus that I think back up my point that Jesus is not the kind of person that I would want to have a personal relationship with, be friends with, or any of that. Even if he happens to be able to do magic stuff like walk on water and all of that, that would be interesting and neat to see. But he is the kind of person. One of the first stories I'd like to point out too, early on in I think already in Matthew, there's a story about Jesus that comes upon these men who are overtly aggressive, and Jesus immediately seems to assume that these people are possessed with demons, and that's causing their strange actions. Uh, so right away, here I am talking with this guy that's is supposed to be somebody that would make an ideal buddy or friend, and he believes that emotional problems or psychological problems are caused by demons. Now, in this case, he meets these people in the who are these men who are very aggressive and mean-minded and everything, and he assumes that that's because they have demons in them. In the story, in the King James version of the story, he actually talks to these demons, or they talk to him, and he takes the demons, removes them from these men, puts them into a herd of pigs that are nearby, and then the pigs run down the hill and into a ocean or river or whatever and drowned. Now, that story is so screwed up on several levels. First of all, whose pigs are these that he seems to have been in control of them running into this water and drowning themselves? And was some poor farmer has lost his pigs. But also the simple idea of how ridiculous it is to claim that, he's taking demons out of these men and putting them in the pigs. What the hell are these things? Like something that you pull out of these guys and stick them in some pigs and solves a problem. It makes absolutely no sense to me, and I would be hesitant to have a person that thinks that way as a friend. Okay, another thing that I think shows Jesus to be not the kind of thinking person that I would like to have as a friend or have any kind of a relationship with, never mind a very personal relationship. Another story is, he tells this story, again, I think we're still in Matthew when he talks about the idea that he says, if your hand sins or leads you to sin, you cut it off. If your foot leads you to sin, you cut it off. If your eye leads you to sin, you gouge it out and throw it away. Now, those ideas, to me, are not coming from a person that I could admire or want to be friends with. First of all, the idea that your hand can cause you to sin. I suspect he's on about maybe masturbation there or something like that. But even if we agreed, I don't, but if we agreed that masturbation was somehow a sin, your hand is causing that? And what kind of sins your foot could be causing is beyond me. The eye thing, he's probably on again about if we look at, he's always talking about men. If we look at a woman with lust in our eyes, we have sinned, we have committed adultery. Again, an idea that I think is ludicrous and silly, and it's coming from a person that I don't want to be a friend. It's another example of, I think Jesus is a jerk. What other, another one he pulls off. He says, they tell a story. I don't know if he's talking in this one. I think they're telling this, somebody's telling the story about Jesus is walking around with his friends, his buddies or disciples, and he is hungry. He looks off in the distance and sees a fig tree. You all know this story probably. So he goes to the fig tree to get some fruit, some figs off the tree because he's hungry. He gets there and there's no figs on the fig tree because it's the wrong time of year. The fig tree is not producing fruit. Now Jesus, it seems to me, in a fit of childish anger or something, decides to, he says something like, that's it, fig tree, you're never going to produce fruit again. And then very shortly in the story, we find that the fig tree is dead. He's zapped it. Sort of, okay. That seems to me an example of a guy that is acting horribly childish and not the kind of person, again, that I want to be friends with. He's a jerk. Okay, another story he tells. We all know the thing of love your enemies. Okay, now, first of all, I don't think it's a good idea to love your enemies. I would suggest that something like, if you have enemies for whatever reason, they dislike you or are threatening to you or everything, my suggestion is to stay clear of them. So anyway, but the problem is, I'm going to try to point out that he's hypocritical in this case. He says, love your enemies, then not long afterwards, he's talking about those who believe in him and follow him, they will get the reward of life everlasting. Those who don't, in other words, are enemies or disagree with him or whatever, they are condemned forever in hell. Once again, it's not the kind of person that thinks that way that I want to be friends with. Okay, what else does he pull off? He, what did we cover? The fig tree, the demons and the pigs running into the water and drowning your eye and your hand sinning and cutting them off, and that idea of mutilating yourself. Oh, there's another lovely story. I think it's in Matthew 19, maybe 12, something like that. He talks about eunuchs. I've never heard Christians talk about this particular story, but he talks about eunuchs, which is men who are castrated or desexualized physically. And it seems to be saying, he says it can happen from birth, it can happen from biological imperfections in our body, or men can choose to actually castrate themselves. That's what the story indicates. And at the end of the thing, it seems to be, if you choose to do that, i.e., make yourself a eunuch, castrate yourself, it's not really a bad idea. It seems to be okay. Once again, this guy is okay with cutting off hands, cutting off feet, gouging out your eyes, cutting off your testicles. It seems to be he's going with all those ideas, and I think all of those are bad ideas to teach people. Self-denigration is it's not denigration, what is, we're actually cutting off parts of our bodies and stuff like that. Okay, what else have I got to deal with here? Other ways that I think Jesus is a jerk. One of the things that drives me nuts, I mean, in my friends, I choose people generally that are not arrogant. I'm happy to see people that are pleased with things that they have accomplished in life and want to take credit for it. In my own case, for example, I'm very pleased with the idea that I managed to go to university, get an undergraduate degree, and do a master's program in philosophy. Though it didn't, I wouldn't say that it was a big deal in my life. It never got me any great jobs or anything like that, but it's just one of those things that I'm really pleased that I happened to do it. But Jesus reminds me a little bit about, I don't know if any of you are old enough to know Cassius Clay, who was a famous American boxer, and he became Muhammad Ali. And I admired this guy as an athlete. He was an incredible boxer. But would I want him as a friend? No, because he had this thing, and I think very much like Jesus, he had this thing that I am the greatest. He physically, actually said those things. Ali, I'm talking about. So, even though I admired what he did, and I did, I wouldn't want him to be a friend. I wouldn't want to befriend him and to spend a lot of time with him, because I think it's ridiculous for anybody to be going, I am the greatest. Jesus does that over and over again. I am the light, I am the truth, I am the way. It sounds arrogant to me. So he's arrogant, hypocritical, and another one, it appears that he basically lies. Now, I don't know if he's saying this, but the story tells us that if you go to Jesus and you ask for anything, he will give it to you. And that's just a straight up lie. Every time I ask Christians to demonstrate that he has fulfilled that promise, nobody can do it. They start doing their tap dance and everything, but nobody can seem to show me any evidence that this Jesus has actually fulfilled his promise and give them something that he asked for. I mean, even when they ask for, they say, well, you can't ask for things personal. You can't ask to be rich, because that's not fair. You're asking for something personal. But what about asking for some children to be cured of a disease? Wouldn't that be? And it doesn't seem to work. In fact, it's been proven that it doesn't work, sort of thing. Okay, just to pause a little bit here, I want to remind you that I'm Ed. This is a video on my YouTube channel called Atheist, a Bird with No Cage. I'm 78 years old, and once again, I don't know if there's a time in my life when I would probably lie about my age, especially if I was trying to impress somebody. When I turned 50, or if I was 49, I wouldn't say I was 50, I'd say, well, I'm in my 40s. But now I'm at a point where, it's okay to say I'm 78. I don't think there's anything to brag about there, but it certainly is admitting a truth. And I have all the problems, or many of the problems of being someone who is 78 years old. According to the Bible, I'm already 8 years into the bonus thing. I think the Bible thinks we are given 70 years, and anything after that is bonus. So I'm happy to be in those bonus years. By the way, if you noticed that in the background here is the house where Glenn and I live, and especially Glenn is very proud of our house, and she's, I don't know, she's somewhere in the background. I'll tell you a little bit about maybe us and how we live. Before Marco and I set up the camera to do this video, there was some cats sitting on the terrace back there. I don't know if any of them are still there. We also have a little dog called Luna that I've mentioned before. Now, Glenda saw that the cats some of them were laying on the terrace, and she thought, oh, that'll be a pretty background for the video. And then by the time we got the camera set up and everything, the cats had disappeared. I think there was still one laying over there, maybe. I think it's Callie or whatever. But anyway, Glenda goes, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put some cat food here, and maybe I'll coax them back into the scope of the video. Well, she forgot about one little thing. Luna loves food, and cat food is just fine with her. So Glenn put the cat food out. Before the cats could get there, Luna come by and did her vacuuming thing. We call her our little personal vacuumer. When we drop food, we just say, Luna, here it is. So she scoffed that food up, and of course, So if there's no cats in my background, that's the reason why. Okay, so I'd just like to reiterate here what this is all about. Again, I'm talking about the idea of evangelical Christians, friends, that tell me for them what is important is their personal relationship with Jesus Christ, the risen Lord, the living God. They use all of those kinds of terms. And my point is that the whole point of this video is that I think the guy, if you're talking about the guy in the New Testament, I think he demonstrates himself to be what I refer to as a joke also, and not the kind of person that I would recommend as a friend. I don't see any wisdom coming out of his mouth. I mean, he says things like, give everything you own to the poor and come follow me. He says things like, to be my disciple, you have to hate your father and your mother. You have to hate your brothers and your sisters. You indeed have to hate life itself. I think we're still in Matthew here. And some of these things are reiterated in other of the Gospels, the so-called Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Again, that's the point, the message that I want to give to people who call themselves born again, evangelicals, all of those people they're very much into the New Testament and this idea of this ideal person called Jesus that I don't see as the kind of person that I want to follow or I want to be friends with or have a personal relationship with. Okay, and I think that's about it. We're on close to 20 minutes here, so I'd like to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming to Atheist, the Bird with No Cage. And